So Liz and I have already painted a pretty bleak picture, as you know, about the state of the disunited kingdom. Connor Tomlinson will be doing that tomorrow. He is an independent journalist, host of Tomlinson Talks on YouTube. But Liz, is there any reason to hope? Do you think Nigel Farage is the man who can do this?
Well, I am optimistic about the UK because I see the same things that are happening or have happened in America, now happening in Britain. There is a mass movement of people who are frustrated about economic stagnation, excessive immigration, the threat to free speech. And they're actually out on the streets in Britain. And this is something new. This is something we haven't seen really.
Like our Tea Party?
In our lifetimes. Yeah, we're kind of at the Tea Party MAGA phase. I think what I want to see is fast forwarding to Trump 2. Rather than going through Trump 1 and Biden, we could do without that. So we need to get straight to Trump 2. And the biggest issue for me isn't who is in Downing Street, although that's obviously important. But what I know is currently all the power is exercised by the blob, by the bureaucrats, by the unaccountable judiciary. And the message I want to get across is anybody who is serious about restoring Britain, restoring our liberties, restoring the great country we are, has to replace the senior bureaucrats. They've got to reverse all the Tony Blair laws. I mean, Tony Blair is pretty much the last prime minister in Britain who has actually run the country. Everyone since has been a captive of the bureaucracy. That's a reality of the situation. So my message is really, we need to get straight to Trump 2, and how do we do that?
Connor, do you think Reform UK is the answer?
So, is this on? Yes. Wonderful, there we go. You'd think with ears like mine I could hear myself. Dan, as you'll well know, any political commentary, I'd say any honest journalist, because the idea that any journalist is neutral is farcical. Everyone has a bias, it's why you get into politics. Any political commentary is carrot and stick. You reward things you like, you rap on the knuckles things you dislike. And both you and I, as you said in your speech, have been critical friends of Reform UK when we felt that they've wavered off the path. For example, as you mentioned, they wanted to denounce mass deportations a while ago. I said at their conference last year, it's the one policy they should adopt, not just to save the country, but to win an election, because when their own members were polled, 99% of them said, yeah, we don't want a single foreign criminal in our country, and this is why we're voting for you guys. And it was encouraging to see Nigel Farage come out and say, yes, we're going to do mass deportations. Yes, it's going to be every single one of the foreign criminals currently clogging up our housing and prison system. Excellent news. So the next thing that we need to advance them on is the threat of Islam in our country. Because last year, when Nigel was asked about it, he said, by 2050, if we alienate Islam, we will lose. My question to him would be, which parts of the Quran do you want to make Reform's party platform, Nigel? Because I would say no.
None.
Exactly.
And Liz, when it comes to Reform UK and this political revolution, we have seen a whole load of senior Tories in recent weeks defect. So Nadine Dorries, who was the Culture Secretary in Cabinet with you when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, Danny Kruger, who is considered one of the thinkers of the Conservative Party. What do you think about that? Number one, would you consider defecting to Reform UK? And number two, does Reform UK just risk becoming the Tories 2.0?
So first of all, I think one thing that is worth saying is the Conservative Party is in very serious existential trouble. And it should be a message for the Liberal Party here in Australia that if you don't govern like Conservatives, if you allow mass migration, if you allow taxes to rise to the highest level in 70 years, if you adopt the net zero agenda, lock, stock and barrel, people will react to that. And if you look at the Conservatives and Labour in the polls, I think the last poll I looked at, both were on 16%, and Reform was on 34%, and it's only headed in one direction. So the Conservative Party is in very serious trouble because it vacated the ground. It basically became a Labour-like party, and the voters have noticed that and they don't like it. I mean, as to the makeup of reform, to me, it actually doesn't really matter that much, because Nigel Farage is who the public are supporting / voting for. The key thing is, what is he actually prepared to do if / when he is elected? And he's currently the bookies' favourite to get elected. You know, is he prepared to repeal all the Blair laws, things like the Human Rights Act, the Constitutional Reform Act, the Equality Act, that have led Britain to being in such a mess? Or is he going to be David Cameron Mark II? That's the question I think people have to ask. So, you know, obviously he's going to need MPs. Some of them might be Conservative, some of them might be from other parties. Well, can I say I've had my fingers burnt in party politics before, and what I know from my experience is that members of Parliament can only do so much. If you don't, one thing I'm interested in / working on is how do you actually transform the state itself. So that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in how do we build up an infrastructure in Britain, independent media, a network of people, a CPAC, GB, because so many of the problems that we've got aren't just about the party itself. I mean, the Conservative Party did become corrupted. That is certainly true. That is part of the problem, but it's not the only problem. And, you know, do I want to rush into another political party at present? No. I want to work on how do we create the infrastructure. And you know, we are facing a left that is incredibly well-funded. You know, the Soros network, the NGOs, the left-wing media. If we don't fight them, politicians are downstream from them, and it's very, very difficult to win if you can't affect the narrative. So that's my focus at the moment.
If I may make a brief comment on that. Any revolution should not become a political refugee camp for the people that caused the problems in the first place. So there are some good defections that reform can take. There are also some very bad defections, like wheeling out Nadine Dorries on stage and celebrating her coming into the party when she was the architect of the online safety bill. I understand you guys had something very similar recently, where they were going to throw you in prison for misinformation, you know, saying things the government didn't like. This was the woman that helped write it, and she said she would imprison Jimmy Carr for an offensive joke live on Sky News. So I don't think they should be taking her. I don't think they should take this Labour councillor they've just taken, who is still a member of the Socialist Fabian Society, despite defecting to reform. So they need to be very vigilant about that. What they should do instead is do what Trump has done and look to the legacy of the late and great Charlie Kirk, which is identifying young, enterprising talent, not just for politicians.
Who could you possibly be thinking?
No, thanks. Liz, as you well know from your time in Parliament, I wouldn't be able to hold a party whip for 5 minutes. I would get kicked out of the green benches very quickly. However, I've had lots of friends that have been taken from NGOs and the like and brought into the Trump administration, and they're doing great work over in the State Department. If reform wants to be a revolution, it needs to sack and restaff the civil service, and they need to be looking out for people that are willing to carry out their agenda.
Yes. Liz, we have to talk about your defenestration, because what a lot of people are not aware of is the fact that the UK's current Chancellor, a Chancellor called Rachel Reeves, who we refer to as Rachel from a council, Rachel Thieves, who has been promoted by the mainstream media because she is the first woman Chancellor, and something that they celebrate because it's identity politics obsession, has actually driven the UK economy into the ground, where it is in a far, far worse state than after your emergency budget, when we were told that the British economy was on the brink of collapse. Yet this time, no one's talking about it. Do you feel like you were got rid of in a globalist coup?
Yes. I mean, you were talking earlier about radicalization moments, but that radicalized me. I mean, what happened is we put forward a perfectly sensible budget, which was about cancelling tax rises, getting on with fracking, restraining public spending. And the night before that budget was announced, the Bank of England, which is completely unaccountable, the governor's there for an 8-year term and can't be removed. So the Bank of England announced the sale of £40 billion worth of gilts the night before. And then the budget itself was well received by business, by leading commentators. But on the Monday, what happened was there were movements in the market. This turned out to be largely due to the fact that British pension funds were very exposed to changes in the interest rate. And it was the Bank of England's failure to ensure financial stability that resulted in the market disruption. In fact, subsequently, the Bank of England in a report admitted that 2/3 of all of those movements that took place that autumn were actually down to their failure to regulate. But they only admitted that in 2024, 2 years after it actually happened.
They wanted you gone.
They wanted me gone. And why did they want me gone? Because before I was elected as leader of the Conservative Party, I said, we've got a massive problem in Britain with the economic orthodoxy. You know, the central bank has too much power. It has failed. We need to change its mandate because it had failed on inflation. It had failed on quantitative easing, where we'd seen asset prices rise astronomically, I think, which is very damaging to economic growth. I'd said that we've got a problem with Keynesian economics dominating in our Treasury and in the Office of Budget Responsibility. And frankly, they didn't like that. And at best, you could say they didn't try to be helpful. I mean, how on earth is announcing the sale of gilts the night before a budget remotely helpful? But at worst, I think they were deliberately seeking to undermine me. And if you look in contrast, you've mentioned Rachel Thieves, our current Chancellor, who works for Sir Keir Starlin, our Prime Minister.
I like that.
But you know, so the gilt rates are higher than they were ever in 2022. The debt is higher. So the predictions of the government economists in 2022 was if we raised taxes, that would help reduce the debt. The opposite has been proven to be true. The debt has gone up, the taxes have gone up, growth has gone down, unemployment has gone up, gilt rates are the highest since the 1980s, and yet the Bank of England has said this is not a problem. They've literally said it's not a problem. And even though inflation is above target, the Bank of England have cut interest rates to try and help the government. So what they're doing, and this is the Treasury, it's the Bank of England, and it's the OBR, all of which are unaccountable organisations. They are doubling down on their Keynesian strategy, and it is not working. And only yesterday we heard that borrowing has overshot again. We are headed for a serious crisis. And although I do like to have a go at Rachel Reeves, the fact is that people need to understand in Britain that the problem is much bigger than just her. You know, this is an economic strategy that we have been running since 1997. It has been an utter failure. You know, back in the year 2000, the British GDP per capita was about the same as the United States. The United States are now 50% better off per head than us. You know, the average Brit is poorer than the average person in Mississippi, which is the poorest state of the United States. You know, we are in a seriously bad way. And, you know, when I came in 2022, I wanted to take on that orthodoxy. Frankly, all of my Conservative predecessors had not taken it on. They'd just gone along with it. And that is why they came for me.
And Conor, it's chilling when you think about it, because the UK hasn't really had governments that have followed the will of the people for 6 decades. I mean, if you go right back to Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, which was all about the British public saying, stop mass uncontrolled migration to our country, he was ignored then, even though the will of the people was for mass uncontrolled migration to stop. 6 decades on, every single government has allowed mass uncontrolled migration.
In every election since 1974, and the Brexit referendum, of course, the public voted to reduce migration down to either the tens of thousands or to have net emigration, which is what we had for a little while in the 1980s when I think quite a few POMs came over here, didn't they? We got record migration increases instead. And now we, a country the size of New York State, as I'm fond of telling my American friends, have the same level of legal migration every year as America. I think you guys have something similar. You guys have about 700,000 a year, 600,000 a year. We have 1.2 million. We have had 4 million immigrants in the last 4 years. Bear in mind, Boris Johnson was elected to take back control. Apparently, that was of our borders to then immediately open them to the entire third world. And the other problem is, as well, and it's not just the Treasury and the OBR and the Bank of England that are betraying us, it's the Home Office. So this is the body that's in charge of both our counter-terror policy and our immigration policy. The Home Office is ideologically captured by a 700-member Islamic network. Yeah, who work to promote other Muslim staff members, advance Muslim interests. Members have taken bribes to overturn rejected asylum applications from countries like Bangladesh while denying Christian asylum seekers refuge in our country because they've said, your country's safe even though they're fleeing forced conversions. And then whenever there's an Islamic terror attack, they bus imams out to the site, they take nice photos, and then after the 27 Manchester Arena bombing, where an Islamic terrorist took the lives of many children, the government told the public, don't look back in anger. So we are routinely gaslit using our own tax money. We are ignored anytime we vote to close our borders. And this is why, whether or not Reform UK will live up to their mandate, I certainly hope they do, this is why Nigel Farage is most likely to become the next Prime Minister. Because people are just sick and tired of being lied to by both parties, and they would like a change.
I just want to comment on why we've got to this position. And a lot of it does go back to Tony Blair. So back in 2005, Tony Blair ended the role of the Lord Chancellor, who was a politically appointed individual who was the head of the judiciary. Instead, he outsourced the selection of the judiciary to the unappointed the unaccountable bureaucracy. Essentially, it was captured by human rights lawyers. And of course, Keir Starmer is a human rights lawyer. So the entire judicial system in Britain has been undermined and the accountability has been removed from it. The organisations like the Treasury and the Bank of England have pushed for more migration as a way of kind of filling the leaking economic bucket. So all of these organisations are related and they all have the same interests because they believe that that is what is going to keep Britain's economy afloat. Now, I don't think the economy is being run in the interests of the British people. I think it's being run in the interests of a very small elite in Britain, and they are connected to the sort of World Economic Forum elite, and that is what is happening. So gradually, people's real incomes are being eroded. It's getting harder to get on the housing ladder for various reasons, including migration. And the elite that preside over it want to protect the status quo. So that is what's going on. We are fighting a massive battle, not just against these unelected bureaucrats, but against a whole massive set of vested interests. And I know from personal experience how powerful these people are. Their reach into the media, their reach into the corporate sector. That is what we're dealing with.
Indeed, and it is worth pointing out too that the new British Home Secretary, a woman called Shabana Mahmood,
good British name that,
was previously on a Greek island welcoming the illegal arrivals on small boats and has said in Parliament that her overwhelming will and her driving force in life above anything else is her extreme Islam faith. She is now the Home Secretary in charge of Britain's borders. Liz, I do want to ask you the Tommy Robinson question, though, because I raised him in my speech. This time last week, there is this incredible turnout, well over 1 million people on the streets of London, even though the police said it was 1/10 of that size. But you've got the Daily Telegraph today saying this movement has to be or will divide the right because Tommy Robinson is at the head of it. And the mainstream media tried to cancel you a couple of years ago just because you'd done an interview with Steve Bannon.
They're constantly trying to cancel me. They haven't succeeded yet.
You'd done an interview with Steve Bannon where he had just mentioned the name Tommy Robinson and you hadn't said, oh, he's a terrible man and he should be locked up in jail. So how do you think the mainstream right needs to deal with Tommy Robinson, who is leading a growing populist movement in the United Kingdom?
Well, the question I was asked on the Steve Bannon show was about the grooming gangs, the rape gangs, which have been the most heinous scandal in Britain for a generation. Tens of thousands of young girls being raped, tortured, in some cases murdered. And under pressure, the Labour government said they'd do an inquiry. That inquiry has not even started.
And initially they'd refused.
It's an absolutely shocking case. And that's, to me, that was the important issue that I was being asked about. And Tommy Robinson is somebody who identified this issue very early on when it was not something anybody was willing to talk about. And this goes to a very big issue in Britain, is the way that the fear of being described as racist has dominated the police, it's dominated our judicial system, and it's created a massive injustice. So he was right to raise that issue. And my view is that the Unite the Kingdom rally that appeared a few weekends ago in London, it shows the strength of feeling of the British people, as do the protests outside migration hotels. And I don't really, I don't think Tommy Robinson is not a politician. He's not running for Parliament. This is somebody who is raising issues, and he's perfectly entitled to raise issues and hold demonstrations as anyone else is.
But Conor, there were over 1 million Brits on the street. There was not one elected Prime Minister. Sorry, one elected MP. Not one elected politician spoke to that crowd. They were all invited. But because of Tommy Robinson, they all decided not to attend.
I think I'm going to print Tommy Robinson, Pauline Hanson, and you, Liz, a right too soon t-shirt. Because that's what you're guilty of.
Correct.
That's all it is. He was... Whether or not one takes issues of prudence with a working class lad's political tactics who, didn't go to private school, didn't go to Oxbridge and didn't get a leg up within the Conservative Party or something, whether or not someone thinks he was imprudent, he was correct. And therefore, he's become a bit of a folk hero to at least, a few 100,000 to 1 million people. And so you cannot question his legitimacy. And so it was encouraging, not to bring this conversation permanently back to Reform, but it was encouraging that when Reform was announcing its latest Conservative defector, Nigel Farage was asked twice to denounce Elon Musk, denounce Tommy Robinson, like he's Peter denouncing Christ. And I think because Farage saw, oh, there's a few 100,000 of my voters here, and I can't write them all off, and they behaved well, and they waved our flag, and when your own flag in your own country is a symbol of protest, you know something is really wrong. He refused to denounce them and said, no, actually it's you, it's the media's fault. It's the politician's fault for making women feel unsafe in their own country, for allowing pro-Hamas marchers to walk through the streets every weekend and Wednesday since October 7th, promising to repeat the same atrocities to patriotic Brits. It's your fault. I'm not going to denounce people even if they don't like me very much. It's the media and it's the politicians that are the enemy. And that's the thing that everyone on our side has to understand.
No. But
absolutely. Isn't it a shame that Conor doesn't want to have a political career, because he would be absolutely brilliant. And Liz, look, I often describe you as the best Prime Minister we never really had.
There were some glorious moments.
Are your political ambitions over, or do you think you could return to number 10 Downing Street one day?
Well,
given how much the country has changed.
No, but I am still... The reason that I ran to be Prime Minister in the first place is I could see things were going desperately wrong and I wanted to fix it, and I still want to fix it. I will do whatever it takes and whatever I can do to do that. But I think where we are now, building the movement is the important thing, because what I know is I became Prime Minister, but I didn't have the support base in the media. I didn't have the support base in the Conservative Party. I didn't have the network to be actually able to take on the leftists, and you have to have a movement. That is what I learnt. So this is why I'm focused on
let's build one.
How do we build a movement? Because you can't, we are facing, I just know how powerful the vested interests are, how entrenched the left is in our institutions. You cannot fix that by one person, however great they are. And, you know, do I want to get in frontline politics again? Potentially, yes. I don't rule it out, but I don't need to do it. I've done it. I've been.
She'll be back.
I've done it. No, but I've done it. I've been to the top. I know what, but I also know what the limitations are. And you have a severe lack of freedom, particularly in the current structure where politicians are so boxed in about what they can do, what they can say. You know, what has happened is the whole system is designed a code, you know, called the Ministerial Code, the Civil Service Code, to basically box politicians in so they can't do anything. I mean, it's an art of control, and we need to dismantle that system. And so, do I want to go into politics as it is now? No, I don't, because I know that you can't actually do the things. And this is why I say to people who sort of say, let's just do this tomorrow, I say, you literally can't. The civil servants will say, no, we're not doing that. That's what the system's like.
It's terrifying. Well, look, as a start, I think we've got to bring CPAC to GB, don't we? CPAC GB, because CPAC Australia, I know I speak on behalf of Liz and Connor. This is such an inspiring event. Thank you so much for having us. And sorry if we've brought the mood down just a little bit, talking about the hell of Slippery Starmer and Rachel Reeves, but hopefully you'll take some lessons. But we have been so inspired by you today, so it's been an honour to be here. Thank you.